Now, yesterday we got yet another glimpse of what to maybe expect in regards to this High Republic project that Lucasfilm is undertaking, with the release of the first chapter from the first book, which is called Light of the Jedi, as well as a description of what the book is going to be about from the author himself, that being Charles Soule. We also got a good description of the state of the galaxy at this time, or what it looks like before what happens in this book, and I say that because Charles Soule himself has said that the events of this book will be a catalyst for change during this time period. And before really getting into it, let me again remind or explain to everyone what this High Republic project, formerly known as Project Luminous, actually is, because there still seems to be a lot of confusion. This is going to be a series of interconnected books and comics, and only books and comics, set in the Star Wars galaxy 200 years before the prequels, when the Jedi are at the height of their power. At this time, there are no plans for this project beyond that. No plans for movies, shows, games, or anything else set in this time period. Just books and comics. Though if it ends up being popular, I'm sure that'll likely change. Anyway, like I said, along with the first chapter, we also sort of got a brief overview of the galaxy at this time, which makes it seem like it's a period of great peace and prosperity for all, that everyone has come together and is working together for the greater good, and that, well, it's essentially a utopia. Other than in the Outer Rim, which is only now really beginning to be explored, and hyperspace lanes to it mapped out. The Outer Rim, much like we know it to be in the time period of the movies, is generally a place of lawlessness. But thanks to some sort of initiative called Starlight Beacon, the Republic is trying to change that. It's trying to colonize the Outer Rim and bring law and order to that part of the galaxy. And as I kind of just said, we know how that's going to work out in the end, because we know what the Outer Rim will look like 200 years later during the prequels. We know there will still be slavery and that it'll be controlled by the crime syndicates like the Hutts. Anyway, in this first chapter that we got to read, a ship called the Legacy Run is carrying settlers to the Outer Rim when they encounter some sort of anomaly in hyperspace. And the book goes out of its way to say that we really don't know what hyperspace is. The captain of the ship then tries to avoid it, or steer around it essentially, but the ship still crashes into it, and little spoiler alert here, it's destroyed, and that's how the first chapter ends. As for the first chapter itself, it's a decent enough read, a tad too expository and long-winded maybe, done so no doubt in an effort to hopefully generate some feelings and sympathy for these characters that you meet and then that die right away. But it's obviously impossible to judge the quality of the book based just off this, and it's again written by Charles Soule, who has been one of the best writers here in the Disney era of Star Wars, being responsible for a few different comic runs, including the second volume of Darth Vader. In other words, I'm confident it'll be a very well written story. But as for whether or not the story itself will be good, and I mainly mean the whole story of the High Republic era that they have planned, not just this individual book, well, that's certainly still up in the air, though I am trying to remain confident, especially since we still have very few details. However, with the release of this chapter, Soule went on to explain what this book is basically about, which is that this first chapter portrays a major disaster that will change the course of the galaxy. Which might lead you to ask, how does a ship blowing up in hyperspace do that exactly? Well, according to Soule, fragments of the ship begin to exit hyperspace at incredibly accelerated rates of speed all over the galaxy. They act like deadly missiles that can appear anywhere at any time, and they start crashing into ships, planets, and so on, I'd imagine. And during the crisis, the Republic calls on the Jedi, though he doesn't explain why or what they do exactly. Suppose we'll have to read the book for that one. And, though I fully accept that Star Wars has always been very, shall we say, liberal with the laws of physics, meaning they flat out get ignored a lot of the time for the sake of hopefully telling a good story that also looks good, one not bogged down by too much real science, if you will. But in this case, and granted I haven't heard the full explanation yet, but this is one of those times I'm already having a little bit of trouble buying it. I mean, I'm certainly no expert in astrophysics, and I do know that, yes, even something relatively small traveling near the speed of light is going to cause massive damage to anything it happens to crash into, which is one of the reasons why I didn't like the Holdo Maneuver. It opened Pandora's box in terms of hyperspace weapons that probably would have been invented before. But maybe my biggest concern here, and it's just a concern, is that space is mind-bogglingly vast. In fact, space is a great name for it because that's mostly what it is. Empty space. Though yes, I do know there is still stuff even in empty space. Anyway, it's hard to comprehend the distance between the planets in our solar system, much less the distance between the stars. So the idea that a ship exploding in hyperspace would rain debris across the galaxy and actually hit anything at all seems rather far-fetched. And sure, I fully expect the book to explain that debris tends to get pulled out of hyperspace thanks to large amounts of gravity, which would explain why it comes out of hyperspace perhaps in a solar system because of the amount of gravity a sun generates, or some explanation like that. And look, I don't want to give up any hope on this High Republic project just yet. I'm someone who loves to read books and comics, and there are few things better than to sit down and read a really good Star Wars story. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it yet that we don't know, but it sure feels like a really odd start to things. And I could almost understand if part of the reasoning behind this idea was to tie it into the Holdo Maneuver, to explain why that's never ever done by anyone, because it can shoot debris across the whole galaxy, even though again the odds of that debris hitting something seem insanely small. But the problems with this are that if there was a chance it really could rain debris across the galaxy, that it might hit something or a lot of somethings, would Admiral Holdo really do it? Would she take the risk even to save the Resistance, especially if it had previously caused a galaxy-wide incident that people would certainly not have forgotten about a mere 200 years later? To me, the premise of this story really seems to conflict with her actions in that movie. We also have the fact that The Rise of Skywalker said it was a 1 in a million move, the Holdo Maneuver, I mean. Furthermore, you'd still have people trying to weaponize it despite the great risk. You'd still likely have factions keeping hyperspace weapons as sort of a nuclear deterrent, if you will. That weapon you have that you know is going to, shall we say, F everything up, but you'll use it anyway if you've got no other choice. And so this really seems like a strange setup or start to the overall story to me. It doesn't seem very Star Wars-like either, though we can certainly disagree with that. I mean, I like the idea of a galaxy-wide incident that starts to shatter the strength of the Republic and maybe tests the Jedi in a way they never could have imagined, but I would have preferred it maybe being something Force-related somehow, if that makes sense. Maybe something the Sith did, either intentionally or unintentionally perhaps, that begins to destroy the Republic from within. And yeah, I guess that could still be the case. They could be the ones who created this anomaly in hyperspace, knowing what the results would be. And I really kind of hope that is the case. I hope that whatever this story amounts to, that the Sith end up behind it all. I hope this is another piece of the puzzle as to how they conquered the galaxy. And it would only make sense, because clearly this story, again set 200 years before the prequels, is going to begin to explain what happened to the Republic and why. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about all this, and if you're excited or not for the High Republic. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.